welcome to the deep dive. You know, we all experience lines and cues all the time, right?
Absolutely.
But we rarely think deeply about them.
Mm.
But you guys sent in some really, really fascinating stuff that made us want to take a deep dive on this. Like, from this kind of raw airport confrontation to, like, this almost ritualistic queuing culture in England.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to unpack the hidden rules, the surprising emotions that come up when we're just like waiting our turn.
It's like this social dance that we do almost every day, and the material that you sent is just like a perfect lens to examine like all of these everyday interactions.
Well, the goal
So
is.
we have a snippet of dialogue from like an English language learning exercise, and it's this classic line cutting scenario.
Yeah.
And then we have this really insightful conversation with someone from England about how they like approach queuing as a whole culture.
I mean, they're famous for it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to look at the language people use when these kind of social norms are challenged. Like, what makes people so frustrated,
Right.
and just uncover any unexpected cultural differences.
Yeah.
By the end, you might just see waiting in line in a whole new light.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's jump right into that airport encounter.
Yeah.
So, just to set the scene, we're at an airport gate in New York. A couple arrives, clearly stressed out after, like, battling horrible traffic.
Yeah, it sounds like they had a rough time getting there.
Oh, yeah. You can already feel the stress, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he sees the queue at the gate,
Oh, no.
and he says, I can't believe it took us 2 hours to get here. The traffic in New York is unbelievable. You could, like, feel that frustration building.
Right. Like anyone who's been in that situation, you just feel that like tension rising.
Totally, yeah. And then he's hit with, oh no, look at that line. It must be a mile long. There's no way I'm waiting for another 2 hours.
Classic exaggeration.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's not literally a mile long, but, it really emphasizes his, like, huge dismay.
And what's interesting there is how he uses unbelievable about the traffic.
Right.
It goes beyond just like inconvenience. Like it suggests this feeling of unfairness, like some outside force messed up his day, and then seeing that long line just makes him feel even more powerless, like he can't escape this delay.
Yeah.
And you're right, must be a mile long isn't meant to be literal.
Yeah.
It's really about conveying that feeling of like this endless, daunting weight.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Especially when he's already stressed.
Yeah.
Okay, and then comes the moment that just sparks the entire conflict.
Uh-oh.
Instead of just joining this huge line, the husband just cuts in line, like straight up.
Bold move.
It's such a violation of this fundamental social contract, right?
Yeah.
And of course, it doesn't go unnoticed.
No, none at all.
The person behind him immediately calls him out. Hey, man, the end of the line is over there.
Yeah. No, seriously. I was here first, and you can't cut in line like this.
Yeah, setting the record straight, like reestablishing that boundary.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So clear and assertive. But then the line cutter's response, not even remotely apologetic.
Mm-hmm.
He fires back with, like, this dismissive and aggressive, says who? I do. Sue me.
Oh, that escalated quickly.
It really did. It sounds like it almost got physical after that.
Really?
Yeah, the person who got cut off, he's like, all right, that's it. And the woman with the line cutter says, whoa, I think there's punching.
Wow. That language he uses, that's key to understanding why things escalated. Says who? I do. Like, he's completely rejecting any shared rules, any, like, agreement with everyone else who's waiting.
It's like he's above it all.
Totally. And sue me. It's so provocative.
It is.
Like, yeah, it literally means you can take me to court, but in this context, it's just a sarcastic, defiant way of saying, like, I don't care about the consequences.
Yeah, I don't care what you think.
Right, exactly. He's totally dismissing that other guy's legitimate grievance.
And if you think back to his earlier statement, there's no way I'm waiting, the language lesson points out that, that could mean, like, it's impossible for him to wait.
Right.
Or he's refusing to wait.
Right.
He isn't just annoyed by the wait. He's actively rejecting this expected behavior.
Yeah.
Like, the stress of the situation just pushed him past any kind of tolerance for social norms.
Yeah, he's reached his limit. We see this conflict erupt because of pre-existing frustration,
Yeah.
Like, he feels this urgency, and he has this blatant disregard for the established social order, and all that's captured in this really short exchange. And this is what makes it so fascinating to contrast it with the way people queue in England,
Right.
like what Sarah described.
Yes. Sarah's perspective was so interesting. She immediately said, oh, by the way, in British English, Cutting in line is called jumping the queue.
Jump in the queue. I love that.
Right. And she emphasized how seriously queuing is taken in British culture.
Oh,
She
yeah.
even said, "We're very proud of our queues."
It's like a national pastime.
I know. It's a part of their identity. It's amazing.
Yeah, and it shows how deeply this idea of queuing is woven into their social fabric. Sarah said that if someone jumps the queue, they're not going to get that same direct confrontation that we saw in New York.
Right.
It's more likely to be these nonverbal cues, like tutting,
Okay.
or a quiet but firm, shouldn't be doing that. And they generally make it really obvious that what that person did is just not acceptable.
So it's more subtle, but it's still like they're communicating their disapproval.
Absolutely.
She even gave specific examples of these unspoken rules.
Like what?
Like, on the London Underground, you stand on the right side of the escalator to let people walk past on the left.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
like this system of order that everyone just gets without needing a sign or anything.
It's ingrained in them.
Yeah.
What I found really revealing was how this queuing etiquette goes beyond formal lines. Like
Right.
Sarah talked about waiting your turn to choose vegetables at the supermarket.
Right.
You don't push or reach, you wait your turn.
We're so polite.
It shows how deep this sense of order and fairness runs in their everyday interactions. It's not just about official cues, it's like a bigger principle of respecting people's space and their place in line.
It's so different from that, near brawl at the New York airport.
Yeah.
You can imagine the tutting in London versus the yelling and potential punches in New York. It's the same basic act of waiting, but the cultural norms shape our reactions so differently.
It's wild, and it makes you wonder why these differences exist, right? Like, is it about levels of social trust or different ways that societies deal with conflict? Sarah joked about having a queue handbook to spell out all these unwritten rules.
Yeah, right.
But it shows how queuing in British culture is almost like a rule book, even if
Yeah.
it's not written down.
Yeah.
So this brings up an interesting point for all of you listening out there.
Yes, think about your own experiences. Have you ever seen someone cutting in line? Or maybe felt the urge to do it yourself?
Right. Be honest.
What was your reaction? What were the signals, subtle or not so subtle, that you noticed?
And think about the bigger picture, those principles of fairness and respect that get violated when someone cuts in line, because it disrupts the order and it implies this sense of entitlement, like that person's time is more valuable than everyone else's.
Right, yeah.
And it's interesting to think about how different cultures enforce these norms. In England, the collective disapproval seems to keep most people in check.
Right?
But in other places, like that New York airport, it can escalate to a confrontation.
Yeah.
What does that say about the unspoken social contracts in different societies?
So wrapping up our deep dive, we've seen that waiting in line is more than just logistics.
It's so much more.
It goes from that immediate anger of line cutting, the strong language, to these ingrained cultural norms in England. It really shows what we expect in terms of fairness, respect, and social order.
And it highlights how even in these everyday things, different cultures can have totally different unwritten rules and expectations.
Absolutely.
What might be a minor thing in one place can be a huge deal somewhere else.
Totally. So here's something to think about. Next time you're in a queue or see someone jump in the line, consider the context, the unspoken rules, the human dynamics playing out. What does your reaction or the reactions around you say about you and the society you're a part of?
Good food for thought.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, this was fun.
See you next time.